We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem.
Hello and welcome back. I'm Annie Handmer. I'm a PhD student who ought to be writing her PhD, but instead I am reading to you the text of the 5 major space treaties, and I will then be getting together with various space law experts and space policy nerds from around the world via Skype to discuss them. This is possibly the most nerdy thing that I have ever done, but I am so enjoying it, and it's a lovely way to spend this time of self-isolation and general lack of contact with the outside world, because we are, of course, in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic. In Australia, our response to this so far has been to buy a lot of toilet paper and think about maybe working from home or something. Luckily, I was well prepared with a good supply of galaxy-themed clothing and access to the internet and a printer, luckily. And so I am instead choosing to spend my time reading up on the space law that I would have been discussing in Vienna at the UN meeting had it not been cancelled. But we must be very grateful for the fact that I am still as healthy as ever, and so are most of the people I know, which is great. So please, make sure you stay that way, because it would be very sad if that were not the case. All right, today I am reading to you the Rescue Agreement. This agreement is more formally known as the Agreement on the Rescue of Astronauts, the Return of Astronauts, and the Return of Objects Launched into Outer Space. And to be honest, this is probably one of the flyover treaties, but I do think it is worthy of being read, and luckily it is shorter than the other ones, so I'm very much looking forward to that. I am dressed in my most space-themed outfit today. It is meant to be both astronauty and space objecty, so enjoy that. And feel free to send your selfies of, living the space girl life while indoors and in self-isolation. Okay, here we go. I'm going to begin with the resolution adopted by the General Assembly. This is resolution 2345 at the 22nd meeting, and it is the Agreement on the Rescue of Astronauts, the Return of Astronauts, and the Return of Objects Launched into Outer Space. The General Assembly, bearing in mind its resolution 2260 at the 22nd meeting of 3rd of November 1967, which calls upon the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space to continue with a sense of urgency its work on the elaboration of an agreement on liability for damage caused by the launching of objects into outer space, and an agreement on assistance to and return of astronauts and space vehicles. Referring to the addendum to the report on the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, desiring to give further concrete expression to the rights and obligations contained in the Treaty of Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies. 1. Commends the Agreement on the Rescue of Astronauts, the Return of Astronauts, and the Return of Objects Launched into Outer Space, the text of which is annexed to the present resolution. 2. Requests the depository governments to open the agreement for signature and ratification at the earliest possible date. 3. Expresses its hope for the widest possible adherence to this agreement. 4. Calls upon the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space to complete urgently the preparation of the draft agreement on liability for damage caused by the launching of objects into outer space and, in any event, not later than the beginning of the 23rd session of the General Assembly, and to submit it to the Assembly at that session. This was at the 1640th plenary meeting on the 19th of December, 1967. And we begin with the text of the treaty in the Annex. The Agreement on the Rescue of Astronauts, the Return of Astronauts, and the Return of Objects Launched into Outer Space. The contracting parties, noting the great importance of the Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies, which calls for the rendering of all possible assistance to astronauts in the event of accident, distress, or emergency landing, and the prompt and safe return of astronauts and the return of objects launched into outer space. Desiring to develop and give further concrete expression to these duties, wishing to promote international cooperation in the peaceful exploration and use of outer space, prompted by sentiments of humanity, have agreed on the following. Article 1. Each contracting party which receives information or discovers that the personnel of a spacecraft have suffered accident or are experiencing conditions of distress or have made an emergency or unintended landing in territory under its jurisdiction or on the high seas or in any other place not under the jurisdiction of any state shall immediately, after a sip of water, A. Notify the launching authority, or if it cannot identify and immediately communicate with the launching authority, immediately make a public announcement by all appropriate means of communication at its disposal. B. Notify the Secretary General of the United Nations, who should disseminate the information without delay and by all appropriate means of communication at his disposal. Article 2. If, owing to accident, distress, emergency, or unintended landing, the personnel of a spacecraft land in territory under the jurisdiction of a contracting party, it shall immediately take all possible steps to rescue them and render them all necessary assistance. It shall inform the launching authority and also the Secretary General of the United Nations of the steps it is taking and of their progress. If assistance by the launching authority would help to effect a prompt rescue or would contribute substantially to the effectiveness of search and rescue operations, the launching authority shall cooperate with the contracting party with a view to effective conduct of search and rescue operations. Such operations shall be subject to the direction and control of the contracting party, which shall act in close and continuing consultation with the launching authority. Article 3. If information is received or it is discovered that the personnel of a spacecraft have alighted on the high seas or in any other place not under the jurisdiction of any state, those contracting parties which are in a position to do so shall, if necessary, extend assistance in search and rescue operations for such personnel to assure their speedy rescue. They shall inform the launching authority and the Secretary General of the United Nations of the steps they are taking and of their progress. Article 4. If, owing to accident, distress, emergency, or unintended landing, the personnel of a spacecraft land in territory under the jurisdiction of a contracting party or have been found on the high seas or in any other place not under the jurisdiction of any state, they shall be safely and promptly returned to the representatives of the launching authority. Article 5. 1. Each contracting party which receives information or discovers that a space object or its component parts has returned to Earth in territory under its jurisdiction or on the high seas, or in any other place not under the jurisdiction of any state, it shall notify the launching authority and the Secretary General of the United Nations. 2. Each contracting party having jurisdiction over the territory on which a space object or its component parts has been discovered shall, upon the request of the launching authority and with assistance from that authority if requested, take such steps as it finds practicable to recover the object or component parts. 3. Upon request of the launching authority, objects launched into outer space or their component parts found beyond the territorial limits of the launching authority shall be returned to or held at the disposal of representatives of the launching authority, which shall, upon request, furnish identifying data prior to their return. 4. Notwithstanding paragraphs 2 and 3 of this article, a contracting party which has reason to believe that a space object or its component parts discovered in territory under its jurisdiction or recovered by it elsewhere is of a hazardous or deleterious nature may so notify the launching authority, which shall immediately take effective steps under the direction and control of said contracting party to eliminate possible danger of harm. 5. Expenses incurred in fulfilling obligations to recover and return a space object or its component parts under paragraphs 2 and 3 of this article shall be borne by the launching authority. Article 6. For the purposes of this agreement, the term launching authority shall refer to the state responsible for launching, or where an international intergovernmental organisation is responsible for launching, that organisation, provided that organisation declares its acceptance of the rights and obligations provided for in this agreement, and a majority of the states members of that organisation are contracting parties to this agreement and to the Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies. Article 7. 1. This agreement shall be open to all states for signature. Any state which does not sign this agreement before its entry into force in accordance with paragraph 3 of this article may accede to it at any time. 2. This agreement shall be subject to ratification by signatory states. Instruments of ratification and instruments of accession shall be deposited with the governments of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and the United States of America, which are hereby designated the depository governments. 3. This agreement shall enter into force upon the depositive agreements of ratification by 5 governments, including the governments designated as depository governments under this agreement. 4. For states whose instruments of ratification or accession are deposited subsequent to the entry into force of this agreement, it shall enter into force on the date of the deposit of their instruments of ratification or accession. 5. The depository governments shall promptly inform all signatory and acceding states of the date of each signature, the date of deposit of each instrument of ratification of and accession to this agreement, the date of its entry into force, and other notices. 6. This agreement shall be registered by the depository governments pursuant to Article 102 of the Charter of the United Nations. Article 8. Any state party to this agreement may propose amendments to this agreement. Amendments shall enter into force for each state party to the agreement, accepting the amendments upon their acceptance by a majority of states parties to the agreement, and thereafter for each remaining state party to the agreement on the date of acceptance by it. Article 9. Any state party to the agreement may give notice of its withdrawal from the agreement 1 year after its entry into force by written notification to the depository governments. Such withdrawal shall take effect 1 year from the date of receipt of this notification. Article 10. This agreement, of which the English, Russian, French, Spanish, and Chinese texts are all equally authentic, shall be deposited in the archives of the depository governments. Duly certified copies of this agreement shall be transmitted by the depository governments to the governments of the signatory and acceding states. In witness whereof, the undersigned, duly authorised, have signed this agreement. Done in triplicate at the cities of London, Moscow, and Washington, the 22nd day of April, 1968. And that concludes the rescue and return agreement. Well, I think that is short and sweet and about as good a treaty as one can possibly expect to have. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it and you'd like to let me know, please feel free to leave a comment or send me a message, or you can email me on thespacejunkpod@gmail.com. You can find other episodes on my YouTube channel. You can find episodes of my podcast, which is the usual thing I do, by searching Space Junk Podcast on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and I think basically everywhere. But if you find somewhere it's not, please let me know. I'm always looking for them. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram, where I am at Annie Handma. Thank you so much. Stay healthy, stay strong, stay motivated, stay happy, stay positive, and stay, most of all, very importantly, very nerdy. It was lovely to chat to you all, and I look forward to our next episode. Bye!